This episode is proudly supported by OpenTable.
Nearly 1/3 of diners are booking same day. So they're making those decisions on the spot. And 10% are making their bookings within just a few hours. And so it's why it's so important to have booking software like OpenTable, which allows your diners to discover you. And so when restaurants are on platforms like OpenTable, they're much more likely to be discovered. We help diners to connect to restaurants. Ultimately, having technology, using technology, helps you to reattach to those diners.
Experience the power of OpenTable. For an exclusive offer, visit restaurant.opentable.com.au/DITW.
I'm really flattered when dairy farmers or kids, like people, adults who grew up on dairy farms at farmers markets, and that they'll say to me, "My God, this reminds me of when I was a kid and, we used to drink from the vat." And that's the biggest compliment you can get.
This is The Producers. I'm Dani Valent. Cathy Palmer is just about getting used to the idea that she's a dairy farmer. After a career in music management, she followed a passion for animal welfare into ethical milk production. On her northern Victorian dairy farm, calves aren't ripped away from their mums soon after birth. Instead, cows and calves stay together through to weaning. Cathy ensures a calm, happy life for her own cows, and she gets rave reviews for her milk. But How Now is also a showpiece, proving that dairy can be done differently, with kindness as a driving principle.
My name's Cathy Palmer. My company is called the Ethical Dairy Company, trading as How Now Dairy, and I'm the only cow and calf together dairy in Australia, which means that we keep all our cows and calves together after they're born, and we milk the cows, sharing the milk. I'm located in northern Victoria, up near the Murray. The farm is in a town called Catamatite, very old dairy farming area. This whole area used to be, I think there was 180 farms in this region, and now I think we're down to about 28 farms. So I moved up here simply because it was a great area to understand, get a knowledge of dairying, given that I had never been on a dairy farm until I started my own business. So I came up here where I knew there was a wealth of experience, and the farm I'm on is managed by two retired or semi-retired now dairy farmers who took me under their wing and have done an amazing job passing on their skill sets. They've been milking since they were 6-year-old boys, and now they're both in their 70s. So they've done a marvellous job teaching me everything, except they had never seen a dairy where the cow and the calf stay together. They were used to the traditional dairying of a calf being born and then the calves immediately being removed and put into a shed. So this has all been new to them as well, and they've enjoyed the journey, I think.
How does a music manager become a dairy farmer? Cathy explains her unique journey from the rock band green room to ruminants' green paddocks.
My background is couldn't be further away from farming if it tried to be. I grew up one of 6 in a very suburban lifestyle, really, but our mum, we were always big on food and where our food came from, etc. My career was in the music industry. I worked in artist management, with musicians, and then I worked as A&R, so a finder and a signer for a publishing company. And I worked for many years working with artists on that level and developing artists. My brother, Barry Palmer, he's also he's the Hunters and Collectors guitarist. We had a small record company together, and we went developing really young artists from the age of 15 because we saw in the industry that they were missing out on opportunities and being, unrepresented. So we spent a few years doing that. And then I had my daughter, and so I took some time off and regrouped, and I really felt like I wanted to do something better with my time now. I'd had a very successful career, and I wanted to do something that was more fulfilling for me personally. And it was a friend who pointed out to me that he was kind of shocked that I consumed dairy, given that I had all this, animal activist blood in me, and I was very passionate about animal rights, and I had no idea. And he said, go home and Google bobby calf. And I did, and I slammed that computer shut and went back and said, my God, come on, there has to be a better way. How come we can't keep the calves? And he gave me a really great education. He said it's all about the consumer. It's consumer driven by price. And that really set me on a journey. So 5 years ago, I started on that journey I bought 18 cows and spent a year before that Googling like crazy to see where were these farms where you could keep a calf with the cow, how did it work, what were the complexities. And what I found was there was no research. There was nothing done on it other than on a university level where they did research papers to say remove a calf, don't remove a calf at these many hours. And so it was really just flying blind and waiting for a calf to be born. So the first calf that was born, we carried that calf to the dairy and milked the cow, and that was kind of the last cow we ever trained, the first and the last. From there, they trained each other. They taught each other that, the calves were safe, nothing was going to happen, and How Now was born that way, and we developed from there, really.
There's a dark secret that traditional dairy farming depends on. Bobby calf is a cute name, but it's not a sweet story.
So bobby calf is the term that's been given to the calf that when they're born in a dairy industry farm, bobby calf is the calf that is born. So they basically are removed from the mothers immediately at birth and put into a shed, and they're fed through different methods in the sheds. And then everyone has this understanding, which was also my understanding, that the bobby calves were only the boys, the males. And so then at 5 days old, they're sent to slaughter. And that now I know that's not just the males. It's also anything that's not used as replacements, which, certain dairy farmers keep a certain amount of calves to replace their dairy herd over the years. But it's just... it's actually male and female. And so in Australia, there's approximately 500,000 calves a year that go that way. There has been, with the increase in beef prices, it's been very good for dairy cows because it means more and more dairy farmers are using beef bulls. So they'll get beef animals out of the dairy cows, which is, that's I think that's a step in the right direction, but essentially, a bobby calf is the 5-day-old ultimate byproduct for us to consume milk.
Many people steer clear of veal because they don't think it's an ethical meat. Cathy gives her view on the disconnect between veal avoidance and dairy drinking.
Most of it leaves Australia. We don't have veal that is that young in Australia. Most of it will leave here, can be served outside of Australia, but ultimately a lot of it ends up in pet food and those kind of products, like waste products. And I did an interview with Gary Megan a couple of years ago, and we had this interesting conversation about veal. And I said, because he said it got suggested to him once that anyone who drinks milk should eat veal. And I said, wow, that's really kind of confronting and challenging, I can imagine. And I said, but I guess no one serves veal in Australia, really quite rarely. And he said, oh, yes, we do. We put it up on menus. And he said, from my personal experience, I can tell you my family eat it for the next week or 10 days because it doesn't sell. no one will order it because they've got this really strong understanding of what veal is. Yet, at the end of the meal, they'll all order coffee with milk. So it's a very interesting thing that we've got this real block in Australia, and it's all around the world, about the real price of milk. And that's where I came into it, and I just said I can't cope with that anymore. I've got to raise that awareness, and I'll fight for the rights of the calves.
Sharing milk between calves and humans sounds idyllic, but how does it actually work? Cathy explains what she's learnt about cows as she developed her innovative milking system.
What I did with my approach was to find what would be different, what would happen, because you get all this scaremongering that happens. People tell you that the calves take the best milk, or the calves won't thrive if they're left with their mums, which just seems that is outrageous. That just does not make sense. That didn't compute on any level to me. So I got busy reading and researching it, and what I know is a newborn calf will use 3 to 5 litres of milk a day. Now, rightly or wrongly, our dairy cows have been bred over the last 100 years to produce upwards near 40 litres a day. So in my mind, that 3 to 5 litres, there's plenty there. Just let the calves go with the mums, let them drink, and we've got plenty to take. Now, that, of course, they grow and that milk becomes a higher quantity that they take. But what we've found, and what I've always found on the farm, is that the calves will start to graze a lot younger than calves that are grown up in a shed. So they will graze with their mums. They imitate the mums, and they start to join their diet between grazing and feeding. And so you'll often see the older calves, the way that we do it, because the calves just stay with their mum 24 hours a day. And you'll see the calves all off down the end of the paddock, but they'll come back at night, have a drink, and that's it. That's the end of it. So it's that awareness that everyone said to me, that can't happen, they'll take all the milk. Well, it just makes no sense. They don't even take 3 to 5 litres. Like an average dairy cow, you could say, is 20 litres a day. So plenty. The way the milking process works on How Now is I generally me or one of the guys will go down and open up the gate, and the cows most of the cows will just come anyway, but the calves will come tearing around, and they come with their mums all the way down to the dairy. And I started training the calves to go to the back of the yard, and also because they don't want to be stepped on. They've got mums moving around, and if you really want to upset dairy cows, change the order. They go into the dairy, and dairy cows are really, really funny creatures to watch, because if I go in as number 5 in my run, if you try to move me to number 10, I'm not going to be happy about that. So, they'll bustle and hustle a bit to get into their position where they want to go. So the calves I just found that they were quite happy to gravitate towards the back of the yard, and they just curl up. If it's, sunny, they'll just curl up. The bigger ones might get out and run around a bit, but they will just curl up, and then mum goes into the dairy, gets milked, and comes back around. So they're all in the same yard together. And I've had a few calves go into the dairy with their mums, and they just usually stand there and look around, and because they want to be one of the big girls. And then they'll just, when the mums come out, they join back up with the calves and take their calf off and head back down the paddock.
Milking cows is one thing. Getting milk to market is another. Cathy explains the How Now approach to processing and distributing milk.
Up until the beginning of this year, my milk was always processed off-site. So I would milk for a couple of days and then run that milk all the way to Melbourne, so nearly 3 hours, and have it bottled and then distributed out there through I've got a driver that runs around. But this year I've started processing my own milk. So I've set up a factory in our little town called Numurkah, and I now process the milk in batches. So I can do 2 milkings, and then we process all that milk and send it off. Most of the milk is all sold in Melbourne, in surrounding areas of central Melbourne, so IGAs and more of those food produce stores. Macedon Ranges is very popular for How Now. So it seems to be where there's a really strong understanding of where your food comes from. And I don't think, contrary to what everybody tells me, because there's a bit of a feeling that How Now is very expensive, and that there used to be a bigger price difference, but now milk has gone up a lot in price. So a litre of How Now is about $2.75, whereas a litre of normal, any old pure or whatever milk will be $2.20. So it's not a big price difference anymore. But what I have found is there's regions where people actually will they put their money where their mouth is. They live by that standards and say, I found out about it and now I would only drink How Now. And, one thing that really does get me going, Dani, is there's a lot of talk when I on socials. I spend time looking around socials, people talking coffee is one of the things that really kind of gets me going, because there's a lot of talk about where they get their beans from, single origin, whether it's fair trade and all those wonderful positive aspirations towards having coffee from a really great place. And then there's no thought given to where the milk's coming from. And often, if I talk to people in cafes, their answer would be, oh, yeah, but mate, your milk's just too expensive to have in a cafe. But I'm looking at their coffee beans and I'm knowing that they're paying premium price for coffee beans. But there's there's a real blank spot where there's no understanding of milk. And I know if people saw ads of what it looked like, it would change it overnight. But I refuse to go down those negative messaging. I only try to stay with positive messaging. So, at the moment there's that ad on television about the pork. And I've had people writing to me about that and saying, oh my God, it reduced me to tears. So, it's that awareness. And I have conversations all the time with the RSPCA about RSPCA approved milk, and that's not going to happen in Australia. They just won't do it.
Milking cows have been bred for generations to live alongside humans. Cathy delights in the personalities among her herd and what her cows have taught her. Oh my God, they are the most hilarious animals. They have such strong personalities. And so some dairy cows, like in some ways, I guess they're like humans. Some of my most beautiful cows don't like to be pat. They don't like you to come near them and pat them. But they're so placid and calm and friendly, but they like that distance. I've got other cows that you can't stand still because, you've got to remember some of them can be 400, 500 kilos and they want to rub their head up and down your leg like a dog, except, that would be 400 kilos of head rubbing. So they've got very unique personalities, and some of them are, they'll follow. They'll all be motivated by feed. Others are motivated by scratches. I've got one that's called Auntie, and we call her Auntie because she will feed anybody's calf. She will just make herself available like a wet nurse to anybody that wants a drink. So she's really from the it takes a village theory, I think. And some of them have Candy is one of. I've now got three of my calves who were born into the system now in the dairy. So there's Candy and Mia and Lola, and it's amazing to see them. And the two older dairy farmers, Ken and John, they've commented on it to see a first-time dairy cow, which they call a heifer,
come into the dairy, and often that's a very scary situation. So before the first timer calves, dairy farmers will run them through the dairy shed. Well, we put ours in the dairy shed when they start becoming adults, just so they can walk through and see it, have something to eat. And so when we've brought them in after they've calved, these guys who have seen everything have commented that they've never seen cows come in, like heifers come in like this. They're just so much more relaxed. So I think it comes down to that whole my ethos, and I have a sign on the wall, which these guys laugh at sometimes, is please ask, don't tell. So I always believe that we ask the cows, can you move over there? We don't tell them. So, if you're yelling at them and pushing them, cows really don't like that. Like if you're rushing and you really want to have a bad day, rush around a cow, because they will just pick up on your energy and be really freaked out straight away. So you can, sometimes I pull up at the dairy and I've been on the phone and I'm organising deliveries or things and I'm in another headspace, and the cows remind me very quickly that it's time to, just whoosh, down, calm, slow, and then everything can run smoothly, because if you're rushing, you're going to pay for that 10 times. And also they'll probably start shitting all over you is the other thing that they do. If you bring a stranger into the dairy, they'll spot the stranger and they'll all just start, some of them will start shitting on you if they don't want strangers in there.
No cow can be milked forever. Cathy explains the retirement plan for her dairy milkers.
So what I do now is I've got I've sold a few house cows. So if some of them, one of the house cows actually was, she just didn't actually want to be a dairy cow on a dairy farm. She was a beautiful cow. She was quite happy to stand in a paddock and be hand milked. And I sold her to a gentleman who that's all. A guy who just wanted to have a cow. So I try and sell some of them. Ones that, unfortunately, you're always going to have some that have to be put down or, sent away, because they, if they've got high cell count or something goes wrong with them, naturally you can't sell that. That's, not good business and not ethical to sell that animal on where it's not producing good milk. But I'm also I've got a bit of a retirement village going, because that's going to be part of my business going forward, is that for people to be able to come and visit the ex-dairy cows, because I only milk usually between 40, maximum is ever 50 at one time. And given now in Australia the dairies are getting bigger, that's a very small dairy farm, which means my replacements, my girls retiring, it might be 1 or 2 cows every 2 or 3 years, and they only calve every second year, whereas normally they would calve every single year. So the process, that probably sounds very confusing. The process is, so they will come in, they get into calf, and then they will just say, if it's a first timer, then they have normal gestation is like a human, 9 months. And then once they have their calf, they will be in the dairy my girls will be in there for up to a year. And so the calf will be weaned off at around about 6 months. Then they will stay in the dairy for another few months, and then I would join them. And I join mine with sexed semen and polled. So that means only females being born and without horns. So you don't have to cut horns off. So you can buy all that now for artificial insemination. And so, and so then they have 9 months of waiting again. So, that's 2 years from start to finish minimum.
How now cows stay with their calves as nature intended, but there's plenty of science in this unique system too. Cathy talks tech.
It's really fascinating. I found out that I couldn't be certified biodynamic because they deem what I do as genetic modification. And I don't see it that way at all. It's because it's gender selection in a petri dish, and so it's genetic. The stance is that is called genetic modification, which scientifically it's not. So I think it's a wonderful use of science where you can say, rather than have a 5-day-old calf that is going to be slaughtered, at 5 days old, why? If we can use science to produce a cow, a female, without horns, which is just less things that you have to deal with once they're born, that's a fantastic way to go. And dairy cows have been bred for a very long time off the most quiet. If there's a quiet cow, they will breed from her continuously. And so you've got these cows now, which, they're in such close proximity to humans that it could be very confronting. Like, I've seen beef cows and I find them very kind of scary almost, because they don't have as much connection to the humans, whereas dairy cows, you have to work with them. And that's what I'm always saying. It's like working with the animal, and I think science gives us all these other opportunities to keep doing things ethically much more sound, and and also a much more manageable future, because milk and dairy consumption, I don't think the numbers that we're being told in media, like how everyone's switching to plant-based milk, that's not very real when you look at the milk that we've got from the dairy world. When you see the numbers of they talk about it in milk solids, so it's in kilos. You see those demands, and it's going up. It's not going down, because cheese and all these other dairy products that are coming onto the market. And already in Australia, we're importing a large percentage, because our pool of milk is just decreasing year on year, because the price of milk has just pushed so many farmers out. And we're importing milk like a lot from New Zealand, but that scares me, the future of where else they could be importing milk from. In the future, it could be coming from, China, where we've got no kind of knowledge of animal welfare or feed or anything like that, any of those restrictions.
Have you ever done the Wheat Bix test? Cathy shares some of her favourite How Now reviews.
Well, I do a lot of blind tastings with people just for fun, just to because I'm biased. So I will ask people to try it who I know have big milk drinkers, and what comes back to me time and time again is that there's this richness and creaminess in the milk that they haven't experienced for a long time. The number one comment I always get is, "My God, your milk reminds me of milk of when we were kids." And I'm really flattered when dairy farmers or kids, like people, adults who grew up on dairy farms at farmers markets, and that they'll say to me, "My God, this reminds me of when I was a kid and, we used to drink from the vat." And that's the biggest compliment you can get, essentially, because it means it's as untainted and unprocessed as you can possibly get it. Because I only do unhomogenized milk, because all the good proteins and the fats that are in milk, when they homogenize the milk, they whip it so on a really high speed, and it smashes all those particles. So that means a lot of the goodness is already destroyed right there, and there's a lot of goodness in milk for protein and calcium, and especially Australian milk, because we know that a lot of them, most our dairy cows are on grass. They're not being fed, too much grain. So my feeling is, when people talk to me about them, they say it's really different. The only explanation I can have for it, and it's not scientific, I haven't found a test for it, is I do believe cortisol, because there's a lot of talk about cortisol in meat and stress, being a stress indicator. And there's no way known there's any cortisol coming from my cows when they're being milked and and their lives. Their lives are very fulfilling, and they don't have a calf and then have it taken away from them immediately, so there's none. I did have a dairy farmer friend who said to me, I looked at my cows one day and I thought, I wonder if they just live every single day depressed. And I was heartbroken that she said that to me. I said, I can't believe you think like that. And she said, I look at them and I think they just see their heads down and I think, have I created a depressing life for you? And which was, I don't see that. My cows don't, they show their personalities. They're full of personality and they're sprightly, and I think the milk, I don't know, it demonstrates all that. I did get this one rave review, which only in Australia, I loved it. This guy wrote to me one day, called himself very much a milk critique. He liked to critique milk, and he said, I consume a lot of milk. And he critiqued my milk over his Weet-Bix. And it was the most gold review I've ever had. He talked about the smooth texture, the lovely aftermouth feel, and the creaminess of it. And I said, that is just a review that, you can't pay for, mate. That's gold.
It's not the life she planned for herself, but Cathy is deeply committed to her ethical dairy. She explains what she loves about what she does.
I love everything about it. I really do. I never dreamt that, when I was sitting in an office on a computer every day of my life, that I would be walking in paddocks with cows. I love watching them. I love watching their personalities, and I love challenging the system. I think our mum always raised us. And Mum and Dad always told us, I think I said there's six of us, and that if you wanted something, you just go for it without any kind of arrogance. We had, no money at all growing up, but none of us ever had this feeling of, we can't do that. That's all too hard. And so when I decided to go dairy farming, it didn't occur to me the absurdity of it in a way. So, I had to make a decision 2 years ago, because I always lived in Melbourne and I used to come up to the farm, go up and back a lot. And 3 years ago now, 2.5, I made the decision. I sold up my home in Melbourne and I moved up here because I knew I needed to live around the cows to see what it was that I was doing, and was it possible to expand, because I always heard a lot of, well, that's fine, you're doing it with 20 or 30 cows, but you can't do that on a commercial scale. And I believe you really can now. I've spent a lot of time on this farm that I'm on looking at that and learning so much from the animals. And probably one of the things I really love the most is they teach me something nearly every day. They've taught me a lot about patience, about slowing down and moving with them. You've got to really drop your energy levels down and be calm. And so that's a really good reminder sometimes when we're on our phones and we're caught up in that business, kind of side of the business side of the business, that, you're just too busy and you're not, stopping and looking. And I will love, when I get the opportunity, one of my favourite things is to go and sit in the paddock and work in the paddock with the cows, because that's a constant reminder of what I'm doing, that it's worthwhile, because, I'm certainly not doing this to get rich. But I see their happiness and I see what they reward me with. And I'll be sitting there on my computer and there'll be, a cow, they love to suck your hair. And so they'll be sucking my hair. One will be licking a boot, and they're just hilarious. And then there's the ones that I mentioned before that will just stand in close proximity and eyeball me for an hour and a half, but they will not come in for a pat. So, yeah, I love all that part of it. And I do farmers markets, and whilst I'm getting sometimes I feel like, I'm too old to be doing farmers markets. I do love talking to people who have never heard of what I do, and who love the concept of thinking and being challenged. I've been challenged by plenty of people at markets, and to actually get to talk to them. And now that I do cheese, that was another big passion of mine, to be able to expand past milk to the other thing that I really love is cheese. So, I love seeing the different textures. That's actually something that's really come to the forefront. The Jack Holman, he owns Stone and Crow Cheese in the Yarra Valley. Jack makes most of my cheese for me. And Nadia in Ballarat from Goldfields, she makes the blue and the feta. But Jack makes a lot of the soft cheeses, and we talk about what the girls are eating, because it's that small and it's that much paddock to plate, that what they eat, today and what I milk off them tomorrow and then deliver to Jack can really affect the cheese. And I love that. I really love that part of it, because it's very much reminds me of when I spent time in Europe, and, you go to Switzerland and they'd only make certain cheeses at certain time of the year because they have to have a certain pasture. And we're like that now. Jack makes a hard cheese that the girls have to be on a certain pasture to have that cheese, and all those little idiosyncrasies, I guess, about what we do. It's not white water. It's certainly, it's not just something that you guzzle 2 litres of. It's really complex, and I love that approach.
With the essential help and guidance of a couple of old dairy farmers, Cathy Palmer is forging a new path for dairy, now in Victoria, but hopefully soon taken up elsewhere in the world. With ethics and animal welfare a primary concern for many consumers, she hopes that the how now approach won't always be so unusual. This is The Producers, a Deep in the Weeds production. I'm Dani Valent. Stay tuned as we talk to some of Australia's best farmers, makers and growers. Follow us on Instagram at Producers Podcast, or contact us via deepintheweeds.com.au.